Beautiful to see so many folks. If you would like to share your video, if you haven't already, we'd love to see your faces. They'll be later on in the webinar. We'll just have the presenters and the speakers, but in the meantime, if you'd like to share your video, we'd love to see you. Okay. Thank you, everyone. For those who are just joining now, we're so happy to have you. We are inviting people as you arrive to type in the chat box your name, where you're from, a question or feeling that you have that you want to share with the group. All right, I love all the folks who join right on time. Welcome, everyone. My name is Sara Mersha. I work at Grassroots International as the Director of Grant Making and Advocacy. We're really excited to have so many folks joining this webinar. This is a real important chance for us to connect and learn more together around global solidarity across movements in this COVID-19 movement and moment and beyond. So for those who are joining now, please use the chat box to share a bit about yourself, your name, where you're from. If you have a reflection or a question about this moment you'd like to share, please go ahead and do that. One minute. Great, a lot of really wonderful folks who are joining us. This is great. Beautiful. All right, good to see you, Naeem, Susan, Doug, Linda, Mijo, so many great folks joining us. Welcome, welcome. We're going to give people one more minute and then we'll start up. So just before we start, I want to let folks know that we are recording. We will be recording, and we are also on Facebook Live. So it's a great way to share the conversation with other people now and also later. It will be available as a recording. So I want to let folks know about that. I'll go ahead and jump in with sharing a little bit more about what we're planning to do during this webinar. Again, my name is Sara. I work at Grassroots International. And as Grassroots, we work with social movements in different parts of the world, including in Palestine, Haiti, Puerto Rico, Brazil, Mesoamerica, West Africa, globally, and also with grassroots organizing groups in the US. And we believe that movements are what's needed for the deep social, economic, ecological transformation that's so necessary. We've seen that historically and also today. We're so glad today to have a number of folks who have joined us to share their experiences in building those movements and responding to crises, multiple crises, including COVID-19 and many more, and in building towards the kind of vision we want to see. So Grassroots does work with movements over the long term through a solidarity model. We talk about solidarity philanthropy. We do funding with social movements based on a shared vision and values, and based on the idea of creating the long-term transformation that's necessary. So we also take social action along with movements, and are humbled to be able to be in this conversation with so many folks who are doing the work on the ground every day. So today in particular, we have Dr. Mustafa Barghouti, who's the founder of the Palestinian Medical Relief Society, who is definitely an organization on the front lines, doing immediate response work, but also with a clear analysis of the root causes of what has caused the challenges in Palestine and around the world today, and with a clear vision for the future. Also, we have Katia Avilés-Vázquez from Organización Boricua in Puerto Rico, and La Jornada Se Acabaron la Promesa, who's also going to be joining us, and our own Trina Jackson, who's the B-Fund director at Grassroots International, working with organizations in the US and Puerto Rico around environmental justice. So in this webinar, we're looking forward to learning together. We really see Palestine, Puerto Rico, and the US as three examples that tell a story of a broader picture of what's happening around the world. They'll help us to think about root causes, movement responses, and long-term vision. We want to consider what this moment is calling us to do from a deep understanding of what solidarity means, especially for many of us who are living within the US, where we know it's our own government and corporations here that are behind the oppression and exploitation of people on Mother Earth, both in the US and around the world. And again, we know that social movements hold the solutions for both the short term and the longer term, from the local level to the global level. We're looking forward to learning more and considering together what's needed to support movements in advancing these solutions. We also really recognize the collective wisdom of everyone who's joined us today, and we want to create space for you all to engage. We want you to share your wisdom, be part of the conversation. Please use the chat box. That can be a place for you to bring up, what are things that you've heard that really resonate for you, reflections you have on ways that this connects to other things that are relevant to this conversation, questions that you have. This is meant to be an interactive, dynamic space. So we would encourage folks to do that. And with that, I think we're ready to introduce our first speaker after a short cultural offering. So I'm going to ask Carol if you could share the video, which is a video of a dance called Dabka. Dabka is a tradition in Palestine that has long roots and history. And this is a particular video of folks who are doing the Dabka dance during the Great March of Return. So while the Israel was literally shooting people who are in nonviolent resistance, people were saying, you know what, this is an important part of our culture that we need to share as part of our resistance.
الطول ارسم يا زمن صورة للقدس ذرة للوطن في أبعى الألوان المشهد ملون في أربع ألوان عاشت قدسنا يا شريف الطول ارسم يا زمن صورة للقدس ذرة للوطن في ملون في أربع ألوان عاشت قدسنا نزريف الطول يصمود العسير يا صقر السماء عالغراب تغير علق بالفضاء إلى عالي الطير مع شمس التحرير تهل افراحنا يا زريف الطول منبع حضارات في مي الذهب دون الصفحات يسي والداخل ضفي بطولات يا أرض القدس تاج بلادنا
Thank you so much for sharing that, and thank you to our colleague Ayman, who selected that music and performance for us. I know it like brings this feeling in my own heart that is really grounding for why the Palestinian struggle is so important. So with that, it's really an honor to introduce Dr. Mustafa Barghouti. Dr. Barghouti is the founder of the Palestinian Medical Relief Society. He is a medical doctor himself and is also involved in broader efforts for Palestinian liberation. And I think he's, Dr. Barghouti, if you're ready, we'd love to have you share. Yes.
I thought you wanted me to go second, but it's...
We'll switch it back around, so if you can go now, that would be great. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. I want to start by saying that I'm really honored to be with all of you. I'm really thankful, and we appreciate the effort of Grassroots International for making this meeting happen. Today is a very special day in Palestine, because we are now at the eve of the 72nd anniversary of the Nakba, the catastrophe, as Palestinians call it, when 70% of the Palestinian people were displaced from their homeland and became one of the largest groups of refugees worldwide. So it's a special day for all Palestinians today. In light of the fact that we are threatened with another catastrophe represented in the so-called Trump's New Deal of the century. I'll talk a little bit about that, but let me start first by touching on the issue of coronavirus. I think this pandemic has really exposed the irrationality of the world political, social, economic, and health systems. And I think it has exposed how far the neoliberal policies, as well as fierce capitalistic policies, have led the world to, including also the very negative effect of populism and racism. And I believe that this pandemic has exposed two major things. First of all, that most governments have not invested sufficiently as they should have in the well-being of human beings, particularly in the field of health, as well as in the field of education and scientific research. And because of that, the whole humanity is now paying a very high price. Hundreds of thousands of people are dying. Millions of people have been infected. Even the world economy, which they cared so much about, is probably going to lose no less than $9 trillion. The world was not prepared because of bad policies, not because people could not have developed better technology to have vaccines earlier, and not because people could not have anticipated such a pandemic. And just one figure tells you a lot. If the world has gone and was prepared to do tests for every human being, this would have cost no more than $35 billion. Instead, the world is losing $9 trillion because of lack of preparedness and lack of attention to human needs. As usual, the poor people will suffer most, and the poor countries will also suffer most. And I think we are in front of a very deep crisis, which could lead either to a very major social change, or we could see very dangerous trends of fascism, like has happened after 1929 when the world economy collapsed. And that's why I think one of the major issues that one should mention today is that what we need today, after COVID-19 pandemic, is really a world social movement. A world social movement that can connect people with progressive ideas, with humanistic ideas worldwide, and connect them with each other. Why I'm saying so? Because we live in, as the pandemic has shown, we live in a global world. The world has become a small village, and you cannot disconnect any country from the other. Ironically, many people maybe in some rich countries thought that epidemics and diseases are restricted to developing countries, like malaria and tuberculosis and other things. But as you have seen, this COVID-19 did not differentiate between a president or a normal worker, did not differentiate between a rich country or a poor country. Actually, the worst countries that are doing worst are countries like the United States and Britain, which are some of the richest countries in the world. And that's again because of poor policies. I believe what we need is really a true social revolution worldwide, a true global social movement that could fix not only such problems related to health, but also that could anticipate other catastrophes that can happen to human beings. What we need is a social movement that could transform the world, where the upper interest, the most important thing will be the human being and not the profit. That is, in my opinion, the major lesson we have learned from all that is happening today. We in Palestine are facing, in addition to the COVID-19 pandemic, we are also facing another epidemic, which is actually was produced in the United States by Mr. Trump and his administration, called the New Deal, or the deal of the century. And I think it should be called the deceit of the century. It's a very dangerous thing because the Israeli government is planning to start in July a process of annexation of Palestinian land, the land that should have been allocated to Palestinian state. The Israeli government is consolidating now, this new Israeli government, which will be announced tonight, is consolidating its efforts on what they call the nation-state law, which is nothing but as a law of apartheid, a law of racial discrimination against Palestinians. And the new Trump's plan, which they will start implementing by annexing big parts of the occupied territories and imposing Israeli law and Israeli settlements, will divide the West Bank, as you can see in the map, into no less than 224 small clusters or small Bantustans, or as I would like to call them, small ghetto stands, and making Gaza the largest, of course, ghetto stand in the area. This is very serious. We are talking here about a dangerous system of apartheid
that will affect people. Even during the COVID-19 epidemic, we have noticed the big discrimination between what's happening in Israel and what's happening in Palestine. Just to give you an idea, I mean, in Israel, they have conducted no less than about 480,000 tests, while Palestine could not do more than 43,000 tests in the West Bank and only 4,000 tests in Gaza Strip. Israel has no less than 4,000 ventilators, while West Bank has only 256 and Gaza has only 87 ventilators, and 90% of the ventilators in the Palestinian territories are already in use. We managed to stop coronavirus because we had a fantastic joint work between the Palestinian Ministry of Health and the Palestinian civil society. And Palestinian civil society played a fantastic role. In particular, Palestinian Medical Relief Society, which I am very proud of being associated with, has done fantastic work in prevention. We've distributed no less than 550,000 leaflets. We managed to disinfect many places. We managed to have 50 of our clinics and programs continue to work right from the beginning and did not stop for a single day, although many government clinics closed down. We had 8 mobile clinics which managed to reach out to no less than 110 communities, mainly Bedouin communities and poor villages in the so-called Area C, which is under full Israeli military control and which Israel wants to annex. We had wonderful teams working with people with disability. Our women health workers and women health doctors did not stop for a moment, and that's why we managed to provide excellent care to pregnant women and to continue the vaccination program for children. This wonderful work, although we are very poor, although we don't have so many tests as Israel has, we managed to really restrict the cases in Palestine to no more than 548 cases. And maybe one additional factor helped us, which is that we all are vaccinated against tuberculosis, which seems to have created what they call innate immunity. And that's really an irony that rich countries did not have that vaccination, and this maybe has affected the immunity. We need to continue this wonderful work. And I know that Grassroots International has been very helpful to us. They already provided emergency support to medical relief. But I do hope that you can continue to do that. And I do hope that your supporters and donors will manage to help us. We have a big challenge today because due to the COVID-19 and the decline of support that we are getting from other countries, we have a big threat that some of our 50 clinics, permanent health centers, and major health programs, including programs for children and women, could stop working. Also, 6 out of our 8 mobile clinics will not have funding after August this year. So we do hope that you can support our needs and that you can invite other friends worldwide to engage in supporting us. What we do is not only health work. What we do is much bigger than that. What we do is community organization, community mobilization. What we do is fantastic grassroots work that helps Palestinian people steadfast and survive and stay flexible and keep what has saved us during the curfews, during the first intifada and the second intifada, and during the attacks on us, which is the great Palestinian resilience that has helped us also during this COVID-19 pandemic. We are very hopeful that we can join work together, and not only in terms of sustaining our very important health work in Palestine, but also in joining forces together with you, with all people who believe in humanity in this world and who believe in social justice, that maybe we can together spark the creation of a new social world movement that would make our world better than it is now. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak to all of you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Barghouti. I think I can speak for everyone to say just how inspired we are to hear about the dedicated work you've done, and so grateful for the way that you laid out, really what are the root causes behind this pandemic, the crises that came before. A number of people remarked in the chat how your term, the deceit of the century. We know that U.S. support for Israel's crimes is not new, but it's certainly gotten much worse under Trump. And I think we can all say we stand with the Palestinian people. We call for an end to U.S. military support of Israel. And there's a number of other demands that we could talk more about around solidarity that we've been hearing coming from Palestine too, such as releasing detainees. We know the level of the spread of the pandemic in prisons is really high. There's a specific campaign called No Way to Treat a Child that's about releasing child detainees and ending U.S. support for Israeli detention of Palestinian children. Among many other demands, ending the siege on Gaza being another one. So thank you so much, Dr. Barghouti, and everyone at Palestinian Medical Relief Society, who is doing really courageous work. Wanted to actually come back to some terms, because some of the things that Dr. Barghouti was talking about are exactly the deep structural causes. So we put some terms up here just so that we're all using the same language, that we really see white supremacy, heteropatriarchy, capitalism, colonialism, settler colonialism, as imperialism, as some of the root causes behind what is making communities face such a difficult brunt of COVID-19. That we know that it has disproportionate impact on communities that have faced all these other structural inequities. And in our next speaker, I know, is also going to be talking about one of the hopeful solutions, which is food sovereignty. The right of peoples to healthy and culturally appropriate food produced through ecologically sound and sustainable methods, and their right to define their own food and agriculture systems. So this is something that was defined as a term by La Via Campesina, another one of Grassroots International's global partners. And we're looking forward to learning more about that from Katia Avilés-Vázquez from Organización Boricua. Before Katia speaks, we wanted to share another beautiful cultural offering, which Katia chose for us, from a powerful feminist group in Puerto Rico called Plena Combativa. And this is called El Tumbe. So we're going to listen to a few minutes of this.
Oye, qué barbaridad. Vivo en el país del tumbe. Vivo en el país del tumbe. Yo te lo canto porque es verdad. Vivo en el país del tumbe. Aquí el gobierno es quien tumba más. Vivo en el país del tumbe. Aquí el gobierno es quien tumba más. Vivo en el país del tumbe. Vivo en el país del tumbe. Yo te lo canto porque es verdad. Vivo en el país del tumbe. Aquí el gobierno es quien tumba más. Vivo en el país del
Thank you so much, Kathy. I know you could explain more to us about this song, but really grateful for you for sharing that energy with us and for all of the amazing work you're doing with movements in Puerto Rico. Turn it over to you.
All right, can you guys hear me okay? Yes. All right, I am going to do the share screen thing and I'm gonna see if that works for you. Did that work? Yes, all right, we're
Yes.
doing good. All right, so I will definitely talk a little bit more about certain issues, hopefully in the Q&A, but for now, the first thing I wanna mention is I want to share that in Puerto Rico, we have a long history of standing together with Palestine. We share a very similar legal political framework, even though we cannot begin to imagine the degree of suffering. We understand the cruelty that keeps the Palestinian people oppressed and in struggle, and we stand with you in struggle, always. What do we share from Puerto Rico to Palestine to oppressed groups within the United States? And rather than colonialism, I'd rather use that we face imperialism and this late stage capitalism. I use imperialism intently, and I believe my screen might, there we go. I use imperialism intently because there is an active and constant role that empires use to mold and shape their colonies, to pit us against each other as colonies and as individuals to hate ourselves. We drag the chains of empire everywhere we go, and they shape our landscape, our economies, and our minds as effectively as they control and lacerate our bodies. The Puerto Rico economy shifted from an economy that could produce the majority of its own food in the 1930s to an economy that was dependent and could only produce less than 20% by 2010. That is the orange bar that you see on the right-hand graph. So in less than a generation, we were violently and forcibly moved from an agricultural economy to an industrial economy. Agriculture became equated with poverty and backwardness. So anyone that wanted to be in agriculture must be because you're dumb. And we went from rural to urban supermarkets known as Progress, and an industrial agriculture that depended on the exploitation of women, of bodies, of land, and agglutination in factories. So all of this was done within less than 2 decades by the US empire, precisely to kind of counterweight and subsidized by US interests to counterweight Cuba from leading the way towards freedom in the Caribbean. While the chains of empire were tearing up our islands and creating colonized mindsets, the ruling elite of empire was grooming its servants locally. And you can see here, these are some local officials as well as the oversight board in Puerto Rico. And there is one female in that group, and they are all white. That is something that's very important to highlight in terms of who are the ones that are fighting on the streets and who are the ones that are making the decisions for us. When the US decided to stop its subsidies program, it was cut off without an economic background plan behind it, in contrast to the industrialization plan that was imposed to Puerto Rico before that. So the local ruling elites started taking out loans in order to keep their lifestyle going. And you can see on the right-hand graph, the total debt for Puerto Rico going up as the governments were trying to make up for the loss of revenue when the US subsidies were cut off. As part of the process, of course, there is a consolidation and reduction of services that was mandated and executed by the US Oversight Board that was imposed by the Obama administration. And part of this included elimination of housing programs, elimination of schools throughout. Hundreds of schools were shut down, health deterioration, lack of infrastructure and maintenance throughout Puerto Rico. And it is precisely within this context then that hurricanes Irma and Maria come into the island. The image here has the highest population municipalities to the lowest population municipalities and the path of Maria. Irma weakened us. Some of us were without power, water, or communications for a week before Maria hit, but some people never got it restored since Irma all the way to the beginning of 2018. So no power, no communications, infrastructure completely collapsed. And $1 million contracts given, a death count that was never recognized because, of course, the local elite did not want to ire Trump, did not want to suffer Trump's ire. And for some of us, those $1 million contracts, the rhetoric that Trump has been using has been precisely that. Puerto Rico cannot manage its own money. Puerto Rico does not know how to do this. We are an island with a bunch of corrupt people that are leading the way. And I think it's important for me to highlight that the corruption comes all the way from the top. So we have, for example, one of the things that happened in this past administration is that US people were hired to direct certain local agencies, and they were the salaries of Walter Higgins for the energy company and Julia Kelleher, who is now under FBI custody, I believe, for the education department, and they were crucial in either dismantling or privatizing the process. So of course, the government throughout this whole mess, the government started doing land classification changes so that they could more easily sell off land and generate revenue now that the loans were not as easily accessible. So we took to the streets, and we took to the streets to protest, and we took to the streets to take out the governor that decided to make fun of the deaths that happened in Maria. In Maria, we lost over 4,000 people due to lack of basic services. And we took to the streets at night, during the day, and we were fighting government policy while we were running from tear gas and rubber bullets. So at the end of December 2019, Puerto Rico was hit then by an because that wasn't enough, it's not enough yet. So we had an earthquake swarm become active in the Southwest in January 2020. 2 major earthquakes then rattled Puerto Rico, leaving a new round of blackouts, water, and communication shortages. And it is precisely within this context then that the COVID pandemic comes in. So it's not a blank canvas. It's not something that it hit us and it just exacerbates certain inequalities. It's an archipelago that was already suffering from chains of empire being dragged since the Spanish conquest, and then completely weakened by Hurricanes Irma and Maria and the government's response, as well as the people's response. And that's something that I want to highlight. Organización Boricua de Agricultura Ecológica is a 30-year-old member-based farmer-centered organization that has analyzed how farmers were persecuted during this process. So because our mentalities were changed, of course, food comes from the supermarket and the food that goes into the supermarket comes from the US, right? So a farmer going out to plow the field was something that was not covered, and you were supposed to follow stay-at-home orders. So we had some farmers that were stopped, farmers that were multas, penalized, given fines and arrested and have their hearings coming up because they were out working the field or distributing food. Our goals in general as an organization are to provide open space for public to participate, to get to know the local farm network, learn workshop through capacity building through working the land, share food and eat. And one of the things that we did, because we had already seen what happens, part of our response, and this is both Boricua and Jornada, is because we know that we cannot depend on the government. We are on our own. And both the US and the local government has thrown us kind of at a loss. So certain things that Boricua did is the Diálogos Campesinos. We started a conversation between farmers through phones as best we could, meetings. We had public health experts give us advice on how to keep the farms safe and open. And we created infographics to support farmers so that they could network and they could keep receiving people or selling their product without risking themselves or others, among a few other things that we did throughout this process. Let's see here. And then, of course, there's Jornada. Jornada was born in 2016 as a campaign against the Oversight Board, or against a series of activities that were going to happen in order to more easily sell off pieces of Puerto Rico. So Jornada organized mutual support centers during Maria and reactivated those as part of their response to COVID-19. Part of the claims that we're facing and that we're doing, both Boricua and Jornada, is that we demand testing. Testing has not been carried out. And once again, millions of dollars are being spent on fake tests or on ventilators that will get here, respirators or ventilators that will get here a year from now. So millions of dollars of the people's money that are being denied to us are given to outside companies that do not have the resources to provide them right now. So one of the things that was done was a very easy checklist to follow through on your farm, and a list of demands, which is what you see on the right-hand side, for what we need. We need rent to stop. We need testing, massive testing. There hasn't even been contact tracing done in Puerto Rico as of now. Just wages, rent freezes, etc. So these are some of the demands on a policy part that we're doing, but we're also promoting that people, even though we are having to wear a mask, we're not wearing muzzles. And we need to stand together, we need to shout, and we need to tell people that these are our lives that they're playing with once again. So part of it is demanding health for everyone, demanding support for health workers. And one of the most recent events that we had was the May 1st protest, that we had a huge, massive caravan of more than 3 other caravans that joined together to go to the Capitol and actually promote the testing or demand testing and ventilators. But what I think is important is that in general, what we're both doing is calling attention to the fact that people are hungry. And the COVID pandemic, by forcing everyone to stay at home, has highlighted or just exacerbated the conditions that generated hunger in the past, because people were disenfranchised, were taken out of their land. They are not necessarily producing, even though our history was one of producing in conucos. So people are not going hungry because of the pandemic. They're going hungry in tents because of the earthquake, and under tent roofs because of the hurricane, because of an imperial mindset that was forced upon us. And I think it's very important to really understand that what we're facing is incredibly complex, has deep roots, and therefore the response has to be equally complex, intersectional, as I have heard some people call it. So I'm not sure, Sarah, how much time I have left. Let me know.
About 2-3 minutes would be great.
All right, perfect. So what are we doing? Our plan in the short term, we continue to offer immediate support. We've provided funding for farmers to do their networks so that they can distribute their food in economic alternative ways, not just direct sale, but exchanges. We have also started formalizing regional networks and providing masks, alcohol, and gloves for farmers, which is an increased expense. We continue the brigades in smaller amounts, in smaller numbers of people. We hope to rebuild our infrastructure and continue strengthening the infrastructure for the farmers. But most importantly, what we need is the resources to get our land back. And we need to promote connections within and between the Caribbean. The same way in Jornada is la lucha por la tierra, es la lucha por la vida. Fighting for our land is fighting for our lives. So our focus is, how do we get access to land? Where is that we buy it, or any other creative alternative that we can think of? The resources to get access to the land and know how to farm it, know how to get food out of it, is incredibly important for us. So here's a list of the demands that Jornada has continued. Again, we have the Jones Act that needs to be repealed. The debt has to be canceled. Puerto Rico needs to be decolonized. And this is not something, Promesa needs to be overturned. And this is not something that we can negotiate. It is non-negotiable. And I don't care how many times Lin-Manuel Miranda says that we can negotiate these things. Promesa needs to be overturned. And that is not on our hands, unfortunately. That is on you guys' hands. So we depend on you as much as you depend on us for many other things. So finally, there's a lot of groups, because we are occupying these uncomfortable in-betweens, facing intersectional problems head-on. What we need is a support that does not become yet another link in chains of empire, but the tools to break the chains. And we need to inhabit these uncomfortable spaces together, both the person or the groups that are funding and the persons and the groups that are being funded. We're working together. Agitarte through the arts is raising political awareness. Colectiva Feminista is calling out very, very strong issues that have come up with regards to domestic violence, female abuse, and trans murders that have been happening since the pandemic started. Comedores Sociales has highlighted and underscored the need for food and culture and food for everyone, access to food for everyone. And it has the arrest of Giovanni Roberto, one of their leaders recently, actually highlighted the racial duality and the anti-Blackness that we live here in Puerto Rico. Arresting Giovanni as a Black man leader for a just distribution of food for poor people and rich light-skinned people or kids from a private school in Puerto Rico that were allowed to go hang out on the beaches to celebrate their graduation. So Colectivo ILE is also another group that is doing racial awareness and how do we make visible the struggles that Black people have had in Puerto Rico as well. So these are things that we face together. And I believe very strongly that it is possible to go beyond the biggest bang buck mentality that's usual when donations happen, because it is our lives that are on the line. And more than that, the reward that we're facing is hope itself, is seeing that each action that the world that we fight for is getting just a little bit closer for us. And we need that we need all those approaches to the work that we do. We are all chained by the sins of the past. So the same way that we're chaining, that we carry the weight of the damage of those chains in the present, it is our commitment, our willingness to stand with each other towards justice beyond mere equity. I have no doubt that we will all stand together in the future as free people. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Katya. So beautiful the way you wove together the clear analysis of the history of what has happened with imperialism in Puerto Rico, how that connects to the present day realities, and also the hope that you're bringing us from the powerful ways that movements are creating self-determination and a way forward for liberation. We stand with you and all the movements in Puerto Rico, and we are committed to working from within the US. To your call to us, we need to end PROMESA, cancel the debt, repeal the Jones Act, and lift up multiple sovereignties, territorial sovereignty, food sovereignty, energy independence, and land for the people. Such a key demand that you're bringing up. So thank you so much. Because we know that it's the peasants and small farmers who both cool the planet, the people. That's what's needed in this moment. We've seen how industrial agriculture has actually been one of the root causes of this pandemic, and food sovereignty is one of the clearest solutions forward. So we're so grateful to you for the work you're doing. And we will be with you. We'll take up your challenge to us. So with that, we have our third musical offering, which comes from US movements. Carol can set us up with that. I know it's about to come up. Okay, we'll come back maybe. The next, while Carol's working on that, the next person who we're going to have as a speaker is Trina Jackson, who is a very dear friend. And okay, there we go. We got the music. Thank you. Thank you so much, Carol, for sharing that. So Trina Jackson is both a dear friend, a longtime community organizer who's been working for racial justice, environmental and ecological justice, against violence against women, really beautifully connects the issues and is able to articulate how all of these different struggles are connected. She's now the B Fund director at Grassroots International. The B Fund is a fund that was established in collaboration with the Building Equity and Alignment for Impact Initiative, which is a collaboration between grassroots organizing groups, national environmental groups, and funders who, among other things, recognize the disparity of funding and the importance of getting more funding to the grassroots organizing sector. So we're now a fund manager with the B Fund, and Trina is directing the work around getting the resources out to the environmental justice groups in the US and also in Puerto Rico. Trina.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction, Sara. And I want to also thank Katia and Dr. Berguti for your words. They deeply resonate with me, and I hear your call, both of your calls for action and global solidarity. I share those feelings and really hope to kind of convey those. And what I would like to share about what this current moment means about our work together. Well, the first thing I want to say is what I really love about that piece of music that I just shared. One thing is that it makes our bodies move. And our movement work is an embodied movement. It's an embodied work. So it isn't just about the intellect, and it isn't just about an analysis, but it is about us moving forward. It's about a defiance and a sense of self-determination in the face of brutal movement suppression often, for our political rights, for our dignity, for self-determination. And you know, what we as movements, we have to confront is the state violence of all kinds. State violence, as we know, that is infused with the intersections of white supremacy, capitalism, late stage capitalism, that's already been uplifted, class exploitation, patriarchy, and heterosexism. So, and you know, I think it's important that we also just remember that when we talk about the state violence, we're not just talking about the physical harm that comes from the police brutality and the militarism in our police departments and so forth, and the militaristic violence that our communities are targeted with, but it's also the structural violence that comes from policies that deliberately deny our humanity through a deliberate lack of access to healthcare, to housing, to food, to protection, to opportunities, to justice, and to a healthy planet. So in this ways, state violence is more than just a single event. It's an ongoing condition of our lives that are just like embedded in all of our social structures. And these are pandemics that are ongoing in our lives. And COVID-19 is another layer, another pandemic, another crisis that is already part of systems of social inequities. And so I feel like that is one thing that, as my comrades on the panel have talked about, is that COVID exposes these deep-seated inequities globally and also within US society. And it just continues to rear ugly, devastating, disproportionate effects on people of color and indigenous people. And when we think about like environmental justice in particular, that the same communities that are disproportionately burdened with environmental degradation and pollution and extraction are the same communities that are faring the worst in this COVID crisis. And so we can start to even make those connections there. And so the same communities that are on the front lines of struggles for land sovereignty, as we're seeing with the indigenous people and native people in these United States, clean water, as we're seeing in Flint, Michigan, where they're cutting off people's water in the middle of a pandemic, where people are being asked to wash their hands. They're still cutting off water in Flint, Michigan. That's still a fight there. Workers' rights and other environmental justice issues, the frontline communities are struggling. And the criminalization of people of color continues unabated. Police violence and police shootings of unarmed Black people, Black and brown people, continues unabated. We have 2 recent incidents in Georgia, in Kentucky, my home state. A woman was in her bed sleeping and the police forced their way in without any kind of announcement and shot her 8 times. Her partner, who thought that it was a break-in, responded and shot the police, thinking that it was an intruder, and now he's up on criminal charges, right? So this is the systemic state violence that we are confronted with. Also, the example of what's happening in South Dakota with Native people setting up checkpoints to try to control who comes in and off of the land as a way to protect themselves against more infection. The state of Dakota is threatening to sue them around setting up those checkpoints. So these are just examples of the level of state violence that are still ongoing in the midst of this pandemic. I also want to just lift up the hate crimes against Asian Americans right now because of the racist rhetoric around the origins of this particular pandemic. One thing that I'm holding right now is this this war that a writer by the name of anti-racist activist Ibram Kendi, who teaches at American University in Washington, DC, wrote an article recently describing a cultural war that we are faced with. And it's a war between the freedom to and the freedom from. The freedom to and the freedom from. And what this war is, that it dates back to the slaveholders' belief that the end of slavery violated slaveholders' rights to enslave. And so we're seeing that manifest in some of these protests to reopen the economy, to relax a lot of the social distancing mitigations. And that is versus the freedom from, which is this collective freedom that is frontline people and communities of color, the freedom from disease. And those two very notions of freedom, freedom to exploit, freedom to put people at risk, is at war with the freedom from disease. Not just this pandemic, but from racism and capitalism and other forms of inhumanity and exploitation. So just in terms of the context of the COVID infection, is that people of color and Native people are getting infected and dying at higher rates than white people in the US. And the pandemic, as Chung-Hwa, the executive director at Grassroots International, describes as well-worn paths of social inequities, right? These are deeply embedded in our structures. And just a couple of examples of what we're learning about these disproportionate rates of infections. So in Wisconsin, for example, Black people are 6% of the population, but 40% of the COVID-related deaths. In Louisiana, Black people make up 32% of the state's population, but 60% of the fatalities. In Kansas, 6% of the population is Black, yet 30% of Black people make up 30% of the COVID-related deaths. In Chicago, 30% of the population is Black, 72% of the COVID-related deaths are Black people. And there's new data emerging, depending on where you are across the country, about how people of color are dying and getting infected at higher rates than their white neighbors. 2/3 of Latinos in particular have lost their jobs or suffered a significant reduction in incomes because of the virus. Black and Latinos are concentrated in jobs where there's deemed essential workers, but without protection. And migrant farm workers who are also considered essential are also working without protection and still dealing with fears of deportation, which creates challenges for organizations working to support those communities. And so I think that what we're seeing with Native and Indigenous people in the US, the disproportionate deaths and rates of infection, particularly in the Navajo Nation as one example, where 30% of the people lack clean running water. And that 30% don't have electricity, and how social distancing is virtually impossible given the conditions that Native people are living on in the, on what's called the reservations. The lack of infrastructure for healthcare, and the US government is indifferent to those, just to the suffering of Native people. And this goes back to just a history of broken promises and broken treaties and land theft of Indigenous people. I read an article recently where Doctors Without Borders has dispatched workers to Native communities, something that is unprecedented because they generally do not work in the United States. And at the same time, we also have the Trump administration is trying to steal more land from Native people, as given what's happened here with the Wampanoags in Massachusetts. I want to just turn back a little bit to the anti-Blackness, in particular for African Americans around the virus, and explicit racial bias is also contributing to the high rates, the death rates for African Americans, even when Black people do have access to care. Black people are being turned away from hospitals with serious symptoms. We've heard some of these cases in the media, and are dying because they're actually told to go home and isolate themselves or take aspirin to reduce their fever, and are dying because they're being turned away from healthcare. And these are just incidents that we've heard recently in the media. And these kinds of decisions are because of racist assumptions, hostile attitudes about African Americans and other people of color within the healthcare system. So the last couple of things that I'll say on this is there's also a convergence of xenophobia and COVID-19, that undocumented people across groups have to ask themselves, do we come out of the shadows? Do we reach out for help? Do I risk the safety of myself and my family? And these are some of the choices that people have to make in terms of getting access to the care that they need. And also thinking a lot about people who are incarcerated. I've been participating in some car actions the last couple of weekends with some at some facilities in Massachusetts, particularly for women's facilities, where the rates of infection for incarcerated women are the highest in the state. And so there is a campaign to call for the release of all prisoners across the country because the care is substandard. And we know that the US incarcerates more people than any industrialized country in the world. So that's where a lot of our investment as a nation goes, is into the incarceration of poor Black and brown people and women of color, many of whom are mothers and separated from their children and from their families. I'm not sure how much time I have, but I just want to end with what my vision is. And I think that this moment is calling for us to not turn around, similar to the song that we just heard, that we can't turn around in the face of yet another pandemic. And as we build solidarity with each other, we have to remember that we fight the impulse to turn on each other, as we often do when we are in crisis, and that we shift the narratives about, the stories about that we tell about ourselves, and that we also tell about each other. I also would like to see reparations. The US is a country that built its wealth on with stolen people on stolen land. So I think we need reparations for the descendants of enslaved people, enslaved Africans in the US, and Native people as well. And I also think that philanthropic organizations need to give a portion of their assets to Native-led organizations in the US as part of this reparations. And I also think that we need a radical imagination for a radically new future, given that everything that both Dr. Barghouti and Katia have also named. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Trina. Just really powerful background and reminders to us of just the deep brutality that racism, white supremacy, capitalism, and colonization are wreaking on communities in the US in a way that's very similar to what's happening in other parts of the world, as well as a beautiful vision that you're putting forward, and connections between how we need to be thinking about our work in all these different areas. We really appreciate that. So we're going to transition into some more discussion with all of you, and we're excited to be hearing from you. A number of you have already put your ideas and reflections into the chat, and we want to encourage you to keep doing that, and also on Facebook. We're capturing the questions, and the ones that we don't get to today, we are actually going to write up and see if we can do some additional responding to them in writing and send that out to folks. So I want to let folks know that whatever we don't get to now, we are looking forward to this being a continuing conversation. So want to really encourage folks to continue sharing your thoughts, your reflections, your questions. And there are a number of things that folks have already shared about ways to take action in solidarity. We want to lift those up. We also do have, as at Grassroots International, a COVID-19 solidarity fund for urgent response with social movements. We've already been able to move out hundreds of thousands of dollars to movements around the world in the global South, and are beginning to do that with movements in the US as well. And we'd love to encourage those of you who would like to contribute to do so. I think my colleagues are putting the information on how to do that in the chat. And there's also an email of our colleague Malka Feldman if you'd like more information or have any questions. That will also be in the chat box. And yeah, well, we are also excited to continue putting out demands together. We're part of creating a feminist foreign policy agenda that includes demands such as ending US support for repressive governments like Israel and India. That includes ending sanctions. We believe that the demands that Katia put out around Puerto Rico are really important feminist foreign policy demands as well. And a lot of other movement demands, the People's Bailout and leadership from groups like Grassroots Global Justice, Indigenous Environmental Network, Right to the City, and more. There's also demands around calling for foundations to spend out more. And there's an effort called It Takes Roots to challenge philanthropy. So maybe someone could share a link in the chat box that shares more about that. What can we as philanthropy do in this moment? What's our responsibility? So
I just shared that link, Sarah.
Thank you so much. Perfect. So with that, I'm going to open up to one of the questions that we've heard from folks in the chat box. And after we have some discussion in the large group, we are also going to try to get into breakout groups. So we'll be able to continue the conversation there. But there's one specific question for Dr. Barghouti, which people asked. They had heard about Israel attacking Palestinian healthcare workers and centers. Is that true? And can you say anything more about that?
Thank you so much, and thank you for all the presenters. This is a fantastic panel, and I really I would like to express our solidarity with what's happening in Puerto Rico and what's happening even in the United States. I'd like to respond to this question, but there is also another question which I think is very important. But let me start by your question about attacks. Yes, we have witnessed attacks by Israeli forces on Palestinian health workers. As a matter of fact, our volunteers, medical relief volunteers, were arrested in Jerusalem while they were trying to provide health education material to people about COVID. And they were arrested, they were detained, they were interrogated, and then they were banned from entering the old city of Jerusalem. We had also other teams arrested just because they were trying to disinfect areas that the Israeli health authorities did not provide support to, especially in Palestinian neighborhoods in the old city of Jerusalem. A major health center which was created in Silwan to help the people by Palestinians was attacked and closed down by the Israeli army. During the pandemic, Israel never stopped arresting people or attacking Palestinian communities. As a matter of fact, they even went as far as entering some villages like Kobar and demolishing houses there of people who were arrested before. And during this week alone, we have lost 4 people who were killed by the Israeli army. One of them was killed today. And as usual, there is a false claim that they were attacking soldiers or something like that. But the attacks and the oppression continues not only as usual, but even it is exaggerating during and expanding during the last week. There was a very important question, which is what should you do? What should you ask the Congress if you write to your Congress people? 2 major things. One, demand that they stop Israel from continuing the process of annexation of Palestinian land, and demand the end of this Trump's plan, which is providing Israel with a cover for its crimes. And second, the most important second thing is to lift the horrible siege on Gaza Strip, which is continuing since 2006, depriving Gaza from all basic needs and leading to a situation where 95% of the water in Gaza is now polluted or salted, leading to a situation of a very serious environmental disaster, and very serious shortage of medical and supplies. We work a lot in both West Bank, Jerusalem, and Gaza. And our teams give us horrifying reports about the difficulties because of the siege and closure. I want also to say that there was a question about European Union. There is a huge campaign now in Europe by Israeli lobby and by Israeli group that is actually was established by Israeli intelligence service called NGO Monitor, which is going after those who support Palestinians, whether they are NGOs or they are governments. And this campaign is trying to stop support to Palestinian civil society in every possible way. And the idea here is to dry up the support so that Palestinians will not be able to steadfast in the areas that Israel wants to oppress and ethnically cleanse. So yes, there is a lot of pressure on Europe. Tomorrow there will be a special session about that, I think, in the parliament, and they are accusing European Union of supporting terrorism as they claim. So there is a need to stand up to this lobby, which is really very dangerous. Finally, and two small words. One question was, what do we share with Puerto Rico? And what is the common between Puerto Rico and Palestine? I would say two things mainly, many things, but especially two things: that we are both oppressed and we're both people who are discriminated against. But second, we are both suffering from those who are trying to steal our land in Puerto Rico and in Palestine. We share, I think, but I also think we share something more important. I think we share the future, because I am really optimistic that the solidarity between all of us and the struggle and the steadfastness and this great resilience that we see here and there and even in the United States by people who are oppressed is going to make the world different. It will make the world a much better world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Barghouti. Really appreciate your response to each of those questions, as horrifying as some of the realities are. It's really important for us to keep in mind. We are about to move to the small groups. I wanted to just see if, Katia, there was that specific question about the connections between Puerto Rico and Palestine, which I know that you already spoke to in the beginning, but if there's anything else you want to say in response to that question, just about a minute.
Thank you again, Dr. Barghouti, for your words. And for the question is precisely what has been shared, is that imperialist injustice that we're facing, and in sharing that hope, the need to secure our land secures our future. So in the ways that foundations and funders can provide the support to create structures in our lands, despite the destruction, despite the losses that we have suffered in Palestine for many, many years, in Puerto Rico over the past 3 years in particular, that we have lost so much, and yet we're still rebuilding. We need the support to be able to strengthen our infrastructure and get the land back in our hands so that we can continue building that future.
Thank you so much. And I know there's more, Trina, that you would be able to share with us. So if you're okay with us moving to small groups, and we'll continue to collect your and share your wisdom in different ways. So I think there are two questions that we have as a prompt for your discussion. One is just, what are you taking away from what you're hearing, what you're feeling, the speakers, the music, all the connections? What are you taking away from hearing this? And what are the opportunities you see for strengthening solidarity with movements that are creating deep transformation? So I think my colleague Chris is going to break us up into small groups. Needs a minute. Okay, so while Chris is doing that, if there is, there's also a link that we're going to put into the chat box with a place that you can also capture your reflections. as we know, there's more that you have to say than what you might be able to say verbally in the small groups. And this is one more way for us to collect the collective wisdom, harvest that and share it together. So when you're broken up into a small group, you'll be assigned a number between 1 and 14. So go to the slide for your group number. You'll say group 1 at the top or group 13. And you can write in responses, whether you're sharing them verbally or not. Feel free to just type in your responses to those 2 questions. What did you take away from hearing the speakers? And what are the opportunities you see for strengthening solidarity with movements that are creating the deep transformation? And if Chris needs okay, here we go. You should have an invitation to a breakout room. So you can select join, and then it will bring you back in about 10, 15 minutes.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. I guess we're together.
Yeah. I think it's a
Yeah.
in this group.
Very nice.
Well, people are in the process of joining their small groups.
Oh,
I think the speakers group, along with myself and Ayman, are just staying in the main room. We're the remaining ones.
Okay.
And Facebook streaming will continue to cover our group. So I think we can get started.
All right.
And we may just have a big group.
Right, but is sure. But I wanted to take advantage of the time that we have with our speakers. So if we can just kind of maybe try not to pay attention to people leaving the main room, I think we can spend a little bit of time talking among ourselves. Thank you so much to the speakers. I think the connections between Palestine, Puerto Rico, and kind of people of color in the U.S., the connections were so powerful. I wanted to give the 3 of you a chance to ask questions to each other too, because often speakers don't have a chance to do that. Is there anything you have for each other as speakers? Something, or it could be a comment, something you heard that you want to respond to?
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
My question
Go ahead.
to our friends in Puerto Rico. What type of social movements you have besides the one that is working with farmers? I mean, is there like a national kind of social movement working for a common program or a common goal? Maybe you can enlighten me on this issue.
There's several, actually. There's there's a history, a political history of, there used to be a socialist front that actually got disbanded a while back. And thus my generation, which is kind of the one taking up the government and many other struggles right now, is approaching the crisis from a different perspective. So for example, Comedores Sociales, which is Giovanni Roberto, is approaching it from the food and poverty angle. So how do we feed the poor and how do we work to get food into the hands of people? The one that I mentioned, Colectiva Feminista, is working from a feminist perspective. Unfortunately, I think because of that history, I guess a macro or an umbrella type of organization that joins all of those is not necessarily strong or active currently. There's, for example, a movement for Puerto Rican independence. Jornada was born out of moving against Promesa, but those are, I call them kind of nodes of power. And what we need precisely is, in order, if I believe, it is my theory that as we build the resources and we start growing from those nodes of power after we have been undone so much, then we'll be able to kind of close the spider web a little bit, kind of connect the nodes. And that has started to happen. And it's beautiful to see the way that those issues cross-cut or join together, like in the case of Comedores Sociales with the anti-racism, that was the anti-Blackness that was highlighted by the arrest of Giovanni Roberto. And the same with the fight for women's issues and the trans murders that have happened. We have had several of the demands are precisely because women are the ones that are in the front lines of this disease. Most of them are teachers and nurses. So right now, I think you've identified something that it's really important to us. We're addressing it a little bit more piecemeal than I think I would like. And I'm hoping that we can start knitting together with each other.
I have a question, Katia and Dr. Barghouti, if I could. I'm very curious. You know, one of the things about talking about oppression in the U.S., within the U.S., and holding that as we talk about the oppression that the U.S. is responsible for across the world. And so I'm interested in where do you see opportunities for solidarity between oppressed communities in the U.S. And peoples in Palestine and Puerto Rico? And how do you see that solidarity growing? What do you think needs to facilitate it more? Yeah.
Trina, Dr. Barghouti, I have to leave in less than 2 minutes. So I'm going to really quickly try to say that, and I'm going to pop off, and I apologize for that. I believe Jesus is in one of the small rooms. So Chunwa, you know him. If you want to kind of have him join in, he would be a great asset to finish off.
Okay.
From Puerto Rico, one of the things that first of all, through La Vía Campesina, actually, we've had members go to Palestine and learn directly from what is going on there, but also how you face different things and how, you know, that in boxing, it's terrible, but in boxing, that feet movement that you have to keep.
Yeah.
And the second part is from, for example, Black and Indigenous farmers in the Northeast. We've been able to learn about the community land trusts, Corporation Jackson to the south, that they've created an entire economy, basically, an entire system. And then how did they go about that?
Yeah.
They went about, you know, we need to take power over banks, land, food, right? We need schools and we need our own restaurants. And those are things those are examples that we're learning from and we're having exchanges with. We've had people from Boricua go and work with Corporation Jackson in certain brigades. We went to the land trust training with the Northeast. And it's very similar in terms of that giving the land towards the hands that that the land was taken from.
Mhm.
That's the first thing that I would say. And in addition to that, I think it's important to, and I'm not sure if this goes to your question or how it could be addressed, but to me, it's really important to highlight that because we have, you mentioned, Trina, that we have to fight the need to fight each other.
Mhm.
I think it's how you said it. And that is even more exacerbated when it is our brown and black bodies. You know, in our minds, it's even more accentuated. It's even stronger, that urge, because that's the only way to survive. That's how the ones of us that made it here are, because we were able to survive no matter the cost. So how do we link with each other again? And I think in that sense, Palestine has been an example, Cuba has been an example, Venezuela has been an example, and a lot of Native American tribes in keeping their cultural traditions have been examples of those currents, of the Zapatistas in Mexico. How we start shifting our mentality is not something that, you know, is this presentation going to be great for the next 10 minutes? But is this something that's going to be relevant and shift to the future in the next 500 years? And that Zapatista cosmovision has been really crucial in how we shift the way that we do things. And the reason I say that is because as I was preparing for this presentation, in the case of the Caribbean, for example, the Caribbean islands, there's hundreds of inhabited islands and almost as many languages, and we don't talk to each other and we don't barter or trade with each other anymore, whereas we were one people. The Caribbean islands were inhabited by the indigenous folks coming up through South America through the Orinoco River. So how incredibly pervasive and horrible that those chains of empire still keep us separated. Yeah. And in the same way, we have the risk of maintaining those walls or those borders with Black folks from the US or indigenous people in reservations or people in Palestine. So, and I think part of what I hope to learn is from those folks that have gotten over this urge to, you know, fence off and protect my little tribe, and be able to kind of reach out and see, how do we reach out? How do we strengthen? In the case of Corporation Jackson, I know Corporation Jackson has faced a lot of different struggles. So how they have come about solutions to face those, and having these exchanges, and again, Chonghua, thank you to Grassroots but having being able to exchange knowledge and exchange experience and feelings with each other. And even something as basic as learning a different language, which seems something that might be considered petty or selfish, is essential. Why is Haiti not part of these conversations? Where, because it's, you know, it's part of the Hispaniola, which is Dominican Republic, and it's Spanish, I don't speak Creole. That kind of limitation seems unjustifiable in 2020. Yeah. So I'm going to shut up because I need to go. And I hope, Trina, that I addressed at least part of what you were asking.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Chonghua. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Katya. Yeah.
And thank you to everyone that was listening.
Good to see you.
Yes. And Dr. Balbuti,
stay
it was
well,
an honor.
And we'll be in touch.
Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure that we met. I hope we can visit each other once we are done with this COVID-19.
Yes.
It will be done.
I would like to invite you to Palestine. Really.
Thank you. Have a great meeting. I will talk to all of you soon.
Bye, Katya.
Okay. Bye, Katya. Thank you for the invitation, Dr. Barghouti. We will be happy to organize an international delegation to go visit you and other partners. While people are coming back, I thought what Katya was saying was so consistent to your call for global social movement, which it's something that we at Grassroots International are trying to facilitate by supporting learning exchanges, delegations, brigades. So we hope to do more of that. Did you want to try to answer Trina's question?
Sure. And I'll be frank and self-critical here. Actually, I mean, not personally being self-critical, but self-critical as a Palestinian movement. I think we, since the Palestinian Revolution started, we've gone through two stages. The first stage was the right one, in my opinion, where Palestinian movement and struggle and resistance was perceived and acted as part of the world national liberation movement. And it concentrated a lot of effort to creating alliances and support with liberation movements worldwide and with progressive forces worldwide. It's not a secret that Palestinians supported very much Nelson Mandela and the National Congress in South Africa, and even it's well known that Mandela used to say, "I thought Palestine would be free before South Africa," but anyhow, and he was the one who said that our freedom will not be complete till Palestine is free, which is really great. And I believe that stage was a fantastic one. The problem started when we had Oslo Agreement and when the PLO started to behave as a state. I mean, or when much of the weight moved from the PLO as a movement and National Liberation Movement to what's the so-called Palestinian Authority. And then I think many people thought they are a state already and started to concentrate on diplomatic relations, on relations with governments. And there was a neglect, actually, of relations with liberation movements and with important movements, even in the United States. That's, well, today now, that chapter is being closed by Israel. The whole idea of two-state solution is being killed by Israel. And the whole notion of a possibility of a compromise with the Zionist movement is vanishing. I think what you will see in Palestine is a resurrection of the real national liberation movement. And I think one of the major things we have to do is to really link with the progressive and freedom movements worldwide, and especially in the United States. I think we have to do, and you have to help us do that. I mean, we need to recreate stronger relationship with people, with African American movements, with women movements in the United States, with progressive movements. We need to re-establish proper relations with national liberation movements worldwide. And I think this would be part of recreation of the global social movement, in my opinion. And I think as organizations that share the same values, we and Grassroots International and the other movements, we should really make a plan for that and start concentrating on how we transform. Our relationship is not about a donor-recipient relationship. It's about partnership.
That's right.
And that's what we need in the coming period.
That's right. Thank you so much, Dr. Barghouti, for saying that so beautifully. And yeah, we want to welcome everyone back from the small groups. We hope that you're able to have some good conversation, even though it was short. I know for me, having the conversation was really wonderful to connect with some of the other people on the call and process some of what we were hearing and thinking. We did want to invite anyone who would like to share. You might not have been able to type in the slides that we sent, so we apologize for the technical challenge on that, but feel free to share a reflection in the chat here. And also, we're looking forward to keeping the conversation going. We're so clear on the powerful lessons from the call today, from Dr. Barghouti, from Katya, from Trina, and from all of you. And we have some real important next steps coming forward. We're clear that this is not a short-term crisis, but it's in a lot of ways a symptom of a larger crisis and larger structural inequities that social movements are working to turn around. In all the ways that we've heard from Palestine, Puerto Rico, US, and also other parts of the world, movements that we work with in Brazil, have been doing really amazing work, and they're facing a right-wing dictator, but being very courageous in sharing the best of who they are, whether it's distributing food that they've produced on land that they've fought for decades, whether it's defending indigenous and Afro-descendant communities. Also in Honduras, similar things where they're facing a lot of repression, but they're being really courageous and they're using ancestral wisdom to heal themselves and to protect their communities. And throughout Mesoamerica, in Haiti, and in West Africa, and really all over the world. So really want to thank you all for the continued connection with Grassroots. We feel like you all are family. You all have been, generous not only financially, but also with your hearts, with your actions, with your hands. And we're looking forward to continuing to connect with all of you in response to this moment and in working towards the broader vision of the future we want to see. So I want to thank you all. And again, that we'll be in touch over email with more responses to other questions we didn't get to, continued conversation, and we'll look forward to continuing to learn from all of the wisdom and beauty that you all have been sharing with us. And I want to ask if Trina, Katya, or Dr. Barghouti have any closing remarks that you wanted to share.
I'll just say that it was an honor to be in community with everybody out there. And I feel like the collective energy will continue to manifest and heal and sustain us. And so I'm grateful for the work that Grassroots is doing to bring people together. And I'm also very happy for the cat in Elizabeth Baldwin's. Yeah, so yes. Feeling that love as well. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Trina. And I know Katya had to leave, but Dr. Barghouti, you have the final word.
Thank you so much. I want to say that this meeting was really, really inspiring. And I feel inspired, energized, and to see this wonderful positive energy. I think that's what we miss. We need to reconnect. We need to feel strong. We need to feel that we're not alone. And what you've done today as Grassroots is fantastic. I think we should continue this kind of debate and discussion, and we should work hard to really create this world national, world social movement. I would say what we need is a world movement for justice. So thank you for the wonderful, inspiring participation, and thanks a lot to every person who listened to us. And thanks a lot to the warm support that I felt to Palestine and the Palestinian people. Thanks a lot.
All right. Globalize the struggle, globalize hope.
Right.
Thanks, Milud. Bye.
Bye, salam.